Iowa.
From high school to international wrestling, on the mat and beyond, this is the Potentially Dangerous podcast with the guys from IA Wrestle.
If you're a fighter, you like a fight. If you're an American, you like a fight. If you're an Iowa Hawkeye, you know you're going to get a fight.
Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and all your podcast-friendly apps. And follow us on social media platforms at IA Wrestle. Time to strap it up and get to the show.
Welcome back to Potentially Dangerous, episode 122 with Ross and Tony Hager here. We've got, 3 weeks in a row?
3 weeks in a row. New record.
Wow.
No.
So, last week we brought you who was going to be in town in Ames, and they got 2 commitments out of it. Those guys that came in were big names, Ross. Ryan Anderson and Cody Fisher.
Yeah, I feel like we really talked about Ryan Anderson being a guy that seemed like a really big target based on his weight and projection. I think we said he's probably going to be at 141. I know the open mat, you guys have him somewhere in the top 20. He's one of the top available seniors. So, obviously it's just a big get on the surface. I think the only thing that's kind of changed since we talked about him last week is, I think Flo might project him up at 157. I think that's a little bit higher than I've heard, but I think he might be closer to like a 141, 149. And obviously a really big hit for their 2019. And then, Cody Fisher goes under the radar. Did you even know, did you even see that before we posted that article?
Yeah, He was sending me some direct messages about just kind of who he thought was going to be in town. And, he didn't say, hey, I'm committing or whatever. But the tweet just kind of came out of nowhere. I think, they sold him hard right when he got on campus. Obviously, Anderson, too. He was coming all that way. You know that he's got a pretty good interest, right? He's just not going there just to hang out in Ames, Iowa. So I think, obviously, Anderson's the bigger pickup. We don't really know what Fisher has yet because we haven't seen a whole lot of national, matchups, big time matchups yet. He just hasn't there yet because he's had some injuries. So, this is a big year for Cody Fisher to raise that stock.
Yeah, and he's obviously got 2 years left to, put in those performances to climb that ladder. So obviously what he's committing as today, his value may go way up. So, for his talent, Iowa State getting in on him early, getting him to verbal early. They kind of always talk about if you verbal early, does that, kind of benefit the school for what kind of scholarship offer. So, if Fisher's stock goes up and he's already committed to Iowa State, that's obviously a really good investment for Kevin Dresser and company to jump on that ship early if, the potential's there.
Well, I want to get to the IGHSA meeting that I went to yesterday in regards to sanctioning women's wrestling. But while we're on the Iowa State topic, Kevin Dresser, Brett Metcalf, they're in the air right now. Pretty sweet jet for one, but they kind of were dropping some hints, right? Oregon, they're in Colorado.
I was going to say, they gave us every state. I think they even gave us the city they went to for one of them.
So, who do you think they're going to see right now? Or have already seen?
All right. So based on kind of what I think we both know for who they're interested in, who they're targeting, the states they went to, I think we got a pretty good idea. They went to Omaha, which I feel pretty confident that's Jacason Burks, number 23 in the class of 2020, lightweight prospect. You probably don't have any other thoughts outside. Who else would be in Omaha?
That would be, there's Moomy, but he's already committed. So, And
then they went to Colorado, and this is one where the only reason I'm feeling really confident it's Moses Schwartz is because I feel really good that Kevin Dresser really likes Moshe Schwartz. So there hasn't been a ton of connections. I don't think Moshe's put out a list or anything like that. I think he's number 149 by the open mat. He projects as a 141. So that kind of makes sense. If he's going to be, if they think he's going to be a 49, it makes sense to target a couple guys that project at 141. So I'm feeling pretty confident that Mosier Schwartz was the Colorado visit.
And Schultz is out there too, but he verbal too. But we've seen that just because you got a verbal doesn't mean coaches are laying off the brakes. Honestly, I mean it's the way it should be, but we have seen multiple coaches go after athletes that have already verbaled. So they sign on the dotted line.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that we can just go ahead and skip to. I mean, they went to Minnesota, and Daniel Kirkvillett.
Kirklevitt?
Yep, there we go. I guess he's not committed anymore, but I feel like that's who they're, talking to in Minnesota.
Wow.
I think he had some interest in coming to Iowa State. I think he had some interest in rolling with Kyvan Gadsden. And I can't remember if he put Iowa State in his top 4 when he released his list. But I feel like, obviously there's been some staff changes, and I don't know if Mike Zadek was the reason that Daniel wasn't really recruited after he opened his commitment. But the fact that they're heading to Minnesota and Metcalf's on the road now, I can't think of a bigger guy to go after in Minnesota than him.
Well, this is what I heard, and again, this is not from inside sources. Could be complete hearsay, but so Colton Schultz, they were recruiting Schultz and Kirklevitt at the same time, and Zadek felt very, very confident that he was going to get Colton Schultz. So Kirklevitt wanted to come to Iowa State. Zadek said, no, we're going to hold off for Schultz to come. Schultz says no. Kirklevitt and Schultz basically commit at the same time, right? Is that right?
I think
Schultz committed to
Kirklevitt committed to Oklahoma State like last year, and he was thinking about opening it.
Okay,
so he committed the same time Kirklevitt was opening up.
Okay, so they're after Schultz. They thought they were going to get Schultz. Kirklevitt reached out to Iowa State and said, hey, I'm interested in coming there. And they said, Zadek said, no, we think we're going to get Schultz. He committed, so basically Kirklevitt kind of, they shoot Kirklevitt out the door, making him like, he's a second choice. And I don't know, but this would make a lot of sense now that this is back on the table if Zadek is gone and they're going after him. So that'd be a huge commitment for him.
Yeah, and kind of going back to their visits, who they were on the road, and I'll build off what you just said there. That I know they were in Idaho. I'm fairly confident that Ridge Levitt put out that top 5 and Iowa State's on it. I'm pretty sure he's visiting at some point. He's number 21 by the open mat in the entire class. Also projects at 141. So yeah, you talk about how big of a deal Kirklevitt would be. That would be by the open mats ranking, the number 2, the number 9. And if they get either Levitt or Mosier Schwartz, they're getting either number 21 or number 49. They're getting 3 top 50 guys in this class. Obviously, they had a top 10 class last year. I mean, it's positive momentum for Iowa State. And if they can get Kirklevitt and Anderson, 2 top 10 guys, that tends to bode well for programs.
So, because it'd be some big things dropping for Iowa State. Do we want to hint on Iowa here?
So
let's get to Iowa. I mean, everyone's wanting to know. Okay, well, we've been covering Iowa State pretty hard the last month, and we haven't heard anything out of Iowa City since Assad committed. What recruiting weekend? I know that Iowa's big recruiting weekend is September 29th, but who are some recruits that you've heard that are going to come into town?
So I don't know. Obviously, we just know Broderson is visiting at some point, so we got to figure he's coming in on that big weekend. They changed the rules up, the NCAA did, and now on 9/1, coaches can go visit the junior class. So I thought this was really interesting because this is kind of based what I've heard from, from talking to families and whatnot. So obviously we know who went to Iowa State's big weekend. And some of the big names on there were those 2020 guys, the Schriever brothers, Gabe Christensen, Cody Fisher. What I feel pretty confident happened is that at midnight on 9/1, right before these boys went to Iowa State, I don't know who was at what homes, but I'm pretty sure the Schriever boys were visited by Iowa, and Gabe Christensen got a visit from Iowa.
Wow.
So right before they were at Ames, they got, the coaches from Iowa showed up and talked with the boys. That's kind of what I've heard. Those are big names in the class of 2020.
Yeah,
not
Iowa.
just in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean nationally. Colin Schriever's number 12 nationally. Colby, he's not ranked nationally, but he's very solid. He's been to like the blood round of Fargo. I mean, he's been on the cusp of placing at national tournaments. So these are really big names, not just in Iowa, but nationally. And I just find it very interesting that, it was known they're going to Iowa State for a visit, but that morning they were talking to Tom Terry or Morningstar, whoever was there.
Well, that's what you got to do. I mean, if you know that they're going to be going on a visit, kind of trump them ahead of time, right? I mean, the first person that gets that conversation or shakes that hand is usually the person that you remember. And when you get these kids on campus, it's just so important. It's so huge to have that one-on-one connection. You think you know who a coach is until you actually sit down and talk to them. And if you can be the first one to do it, usually those are the ones that win. But
yeah.
Anybody else?
Out of state? I don't know like how firm this is, but I feel like I've kind of heard that Robbie Howard, number 2 in class 2020 from New Jersey. I've heard he's going to visit Iowa this fall. Obviously, he's got the Youth Olympics where he's representing the USA. So I'm assuming it's probably going to take place after that, since he's, Iowa is notorious for letting guys focus on what's ever the next big thing for them, whether it be Fargo. Obviously, Abe Assad's the most recent example where he's getting ready for the Cadet World Championships. And I think his story goes is Tom Brands called him and said, hey, I just want to let you know we're interested, but we're not going to, bug you until after your Cadet World Championship. So go out there, win that, and after that we just wanted to let you know we're interested. And Abe said that was huge, that he didn't get continually bugged. So I kind of wondered if that'll be the same with Robbie Howard's big tournament coming up. So maybe whenever Youth Olympics are, I don't know when they are, but I just know he's in them.
Yeah, I've seen Howard's name come up a lot, as far as social media too goes. I mean, as far as, you can kind of get a grasp of like what kids are liking, retweeting, who they're interacting with, so you can kind of get an idea of who he's kind of creepy, right? I mean, but
stalking, yeah.
I mean, I'm on social media nonstop, so I mean, it's hard not to see it, right? I mean, you can kind of draw your own conclusions. So Iowa's got a big weekend here, September 29th. I think Iowa State obviously isn't slowing down. They've got some recruits in again next weekend. So Iowa State, big football weekend. Who you got? I'm taking.
Man, I actually had to miss the second half of the game, which is clearly when Iowa scored all of their points.
That's when you should have started watching.
Right. So I had to miss that. So I have no idea what that team looks like. I just saw a really crap team. And Iowa State, obviously, they played like 7 minutes or something like that, and before it got canceled. So I don't know. I never really feel good about Iowa football versus Iowa State. And obviously, the inverse of that is Iowa State tends to play very well. I'm going to say Iowa wins if you want me to pick one. What do you got?
I'm taking Iowa by a field goal.
Field goal? I'll go bigger than that. I'll put my name on it. 10.
10 spot.
Yep. So 9.5. I'll give Iowa State.
I mean, when I think Iowa has the leg up on Iowa State is, one, obviously they're at Kinnick, and two, they've already played a game, so you kind of get some of those jitters out of there from some of those kids that haven't been hit by somebody else, but then they're on their team. I mean, I'm not a big. I played football in junior high. We're not talking about like those. I mean, jitters are. I don't really know, but I would assume that when you go to just like wrestling in the room to a live wrestling match. I mean, at the college level, high school level, it's just completely different. So you definitely have those jitters. So I think Iowa will have a little leg up on it, but they are definitely the people that are Iowa's favored by 4. It looks like. Just look that up.
Kirk Ferentz and Tom Brands, to kind of bring it back to wrestling, have a pretty similar style where they try to wear you down in the first half, and then in the second half they try to take advantage. Obviously Iowa, they try to wear you down with their pace. And Kirk does the same thing with his run game, right? So he wears down that defensive line with his, first half rushes that don't seem to go anywhere. But by the second half, his offensive line, obviously Kirk Ferentz is notorious for producing them, just like Tom is for lightweights. And by that second half, those linemen are still going strong and your defensive linemen are worn out. So that's kind of what I think happened in that Northern Illinois game. And I don't know, just kind of seems like that's Iowa football. If you don't have a, superior defensive line, they can take advantage. So that's my 2 cents.
It was definitely boring. I mean, it was like I don't want to call out an Iowa wrestler for being boring, but we all know those Iowa, those boring wrestlers. Yeah, you know who they are. I'm not going to call them out, but there's like that guy you're like, Jesus, just take a shot, dude. Just take a shot. It's like Kirk Ferentz. Just throw it down the field. Same thing. Anyways, okay, let's get back to wrestling.
That's our football corner for this week.
Yeah, that's it. We'll just switch this to a iafootball.com podcast. Anyways, so let's get to a big day today. Yesterday was a big day. I think. Some people I think took it as a negative, but so there's been lots of kind of behind the scene emails, calls with the Iowa High School Athletic Association, with the Iowa girls, the boys, just kind of trying to figure out what they got to do to get the sport sanctioned. There was a group that went into the boys and just really off-put some people. People in women's wrestling know who, they've got their own objectives and their own beliefs, and they think that they should just have this tomorrow. Here's the deal, women's wrestling fans. This isn't just something that we can flip a switch and it's implemented tomorrow. There's so much stuff that goes into this, Ross. I mean, it's like starting a business, right? I mean, and the bad thing about women's wrestling is there was only 100 girls out last year on boys teams. There's other girls that competed like at the club level and whatnot, but there's only 100 girls that competed on like had actual weigh-ins. There's around 100. So we got a long ways to go, Ross.
I mean, it's kind of a little bit of putting the horse before the apple cart, or whatever the saying goes. I might have just butchered it. You get a good look at a cow by sticking your head up its butt, but would you rather take the butcher's word for it?
Yeah.
So, no. Excuse my poor Tommy Boy reference. What I kind of want to know is, like, if we start a women's, make it a sanctioned sport, will that bring more interest? Will we see more participation? Because I think that's probably the biggest concern is, what is, participation? Is it going to be enough to make it a valid sport, to, kind of put all this money and effort and time into it? So I think that's probably the big question is adding it, make it interesting enough to get more participation, right? Or maybe that's not the biggest.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of girls. I talked to Chloe Clemens yesterday, and she's talked to individuals at her school that they want to go out for wrestling, but they don't want to wrestle the boys. That's not everyone has that mentality that, I'll go out there and wrestle a dude, and if he beats me up, great. But if I beat him, that's pretty badass. So I think it will 100% increase the numbers. Right now, women's wrestling in Iowa is so far behind. I mean, there's 300, little over 300 female Iowa wrestlers at the youth level, high school, all combined, right? So as this continues to grow, that they're just feeding into that high school program. I mean, there was 200 girls at the AAU state tournament. They doubled their numbers. the year before at when AAU first started letting girls wrestle at that state tournament. So the numbers just continue to go up, and this would only help it.
So I'll go back to, I don't know if everybody that listens to the podcast follow us all on Twitter, but I'll go back to that. You were talking about this on Twitter, and one of your tweets was, we're probably still 2 years away. And there was something else. You kind of made a comment to Lars that there wasn't talking about the process of how they add a sport. So do you want to go into detail on what you know about the timeline and the process on how you add a sport?
Yeah, so, and this is something I didn't know, that going into the meeting, that there is no process. There's no rules to say, okay, you got to meet a certain number of participants. You need to make a certain amount of teams in order for a sport to just come about. They've never introduced a sport besides soccer and bowling that it's been a while since they've done that. And I guess I'm not sure what the process was then, but now they're saying that there is no process of implementing them. I think they just wanted to do it. Right now, there's 9 other sports that their people are trying to get into the Girls Association. So this them saying, okay, we're going to let wrestling in, well, this has implications for a lot more things too, because archery is going to want to say, well, why can't we do girls archery? You're going to stop those opportunities. So the biggest problem, and the reason why yesterday's meeting happened, was they have to figure out a process, a timeline. They have to give some information to ADs of what the cost would be involved. What was really encouraging about the meeting was they sent out an email saying, we're looking at possibly sanctioning women's wrestling, figuring out those processes. So he sent out the ADs and coaches around the state and legislators, and they received over 24 emails back, which, from what I gathered from the meeting and what a couple board members said, that is way more than they ever get back, because they send out emails and surveys all the time, and they might get half a dozen. So to get over 24 emails back from legislators and coaches and ADs saying, yes, we would do wrestling, we just need to know what the process would be, some kind of guidance. Because it's not as simple as, okay, we're just going to have girls tournaments. There's just I think a lot more that goes into it than that. But at the end of the day, the costs really don't go up. You're still busing girls to these events. You have the same coaches. They could still practice in the same room. They would just maybe go to separate tournaments or have girls tournaments that coincide, go alongside the boys the same event. They don't really know how that process would work. Right now, those girls events are running at JV events, but that has a problem, because your varsity might be going to another tournament, and if you don't have enough coaches, you can't go there, and then it's another bus. So it's not going to work for every team.
That makes sense. So kind of circling back to this, obviously there's a lot of support for it. You talked about it's probably going to be 2 years before it would be sanctioned. So, what needs to be done? Does somebody need to meet with the board, or how does the, obviously, like I said, there's support. So how does the process get going? How do we start this 2-year clock?
So from what I've gathered is there is, and it wasn't an open forum, by the way, this meeting, there was 4 wrestling people there. And from what I gathered from the meeting is they are going to take what they all talked about and positive, negatives, questions that they have, and try to answer all those questions for another meeting that is going to take place in November. In November, there's I think another 12 or 16 other representatives that come in from around the state. I think districts come in, and they're going to have the discussion of like a proposition of actually getting things done and getting it yay or nay if they're going to sanction women's wrestling. There'll be a meeting prior to that here in October, I believe, too, where they're going to have another discussion on the findings that they had from the questions. They're going to basically kind of go back and have another roundtable discussion, get all more questions figured out, and then have a full presentation in November to where it's actually voted on of the actual process that's going to take in order to get women's wrestling in. And that process is going to be used for the other sports as well. But right now, it sounds like they have the most support for women's wrestling from the administrators. There's lots of parents out there that are advocating for these other sports, and lacrosse, rugby, archery, trap shooting, lacrosse. There's been three new sports that have been asked to be sanctioned in the last 2 weeks. So I don't know if like they're seeing that wrestling is getting some movement and now they're wanting to get their sport in there too. So there's lots of things that people have to think about of your decision is going to affect a lot more things down the line, not just women's wrestling.
Just kind of trying to think outside the box, and I'm not sure if this might be more difficult than the other way around, but would it be easier or more difficult to start it as a junior high sport and then add it to high school, or would it be easier to just implement it at the high school level? Because, that might be the easiest where you have the biggest, coaching base, in facilities, stuff like that.
There's positive and negatives to all of it. Right now there's, people are discussing dropping junior high wrestling. Heck, even, Johnston almost lost junior high wrestling here in Des Moines. They just built the biggest school in Iowa. So money is not really a problem, you think, right? Participation numbers are there. Almost 100 kids are out for junior high wrestling at Johnston. So, that's scary. So, if you add in a women's team, are they going to that junior high event? There's maybe one or two. With junior high, there's no duels. They don't have duels. They just show up, match them up by weight, and then they just have matches. So you could easily do that with girls if you have enough of them at the same weight classes-ish, right? Otherwise, they're going to have to wrestle the boys. So, there's – I think you do both. They're already going to be doing it at the junior high level. It's just that's right. They're already doing it at the junior high level. The high school level is what the girls want, so they have an actual sanctioned state tournament. So nothing really changes than what they're doing right now, other than that it would maybe help participation numbers, so there's more competition between girl versus girl. The biggest thing too is, when they were discussing this, and you're asking, how do we go forward? Well, the biggest thing is numbers. The initial numbers that the board saw, they were way too low. Well, opposition would say, well, what about like golf? Like, what are the golf numbers? Or
fair question. Yep.
Yeah, or even track, or and wrestling. There's teams that have 2 kids on their high school team, and they're considered a team. They can't compete in duels, right? But there's one kid in Baxter, I think someone said, and that is their team. So you don't need to fill a whole roster in order to be a team technically in an individual sport. You're not going to be good in teams. You're not going to have duels. So the argument that you have to fill the full team in order for this to, she said something like they're going to need 20 teams from 40 schools. That's the goal in order to get started. So they're not just going to say, hey, the sport's sanctioned. They're going to want letters from ADs and superintendents saying that we are committed to adding women's wrestling, but they can't commit to it until they have a process. And that's what they're working through right now, is trying to teach and find out what they need to do in order to add women's wrestling.
How big of a threat is esports? Because it seems like everybody and their grandma, including our Olympics, our famed Olympics, is trying to move toward esports being something.
Well, esports is really popular, but this did get brought up yesterday. So, is esports a sport or is it an activity? The Iowa girls, they sanction sporting events, not activities. So, in my opinion, esports is an activity. But
seconded.
Yeah. But it's like cornhole. I mean, that's an activity. That's not a sport, you know.
It's on ESPN.
It's pretty, yeah. I mean, I would love to be on ESPN. I mean, whatever. And there's dodgeball. Dodgeball's on ESPN, but so I mean but there's going to be people that, you know, at some point someone higher up said, okay, well, esports is a sport, so why aren't you sanctioning that? But esports creates a whole nother. With wrestling, you know, they already have the facilities, they already have the coaches, they already have the bus routes, they already have the tournaments. With esports, you're probably going to have to come in and create a room for them to practice in. You're going to have to buy TVs, buy the video game accessories, all that blah blah stuff. So it's an expensive addition for ADs. Where wrestling is, I would assume, is going to be very attractive. That they don't have to buy new singlets. They could get a women's cut singlet. But a lot of these teams already have singlets, so they'll just wear sports bras. And girls are totally cool with wearing them if they have to. They would rather have a women's cut. Most of them probably would buy their own if it came down to cost, you know. So esports is definitely, I wouldn't say it's a concern to women's wrestling, but it's a concern probably to the association that they are going to have to handle it at some point.
I guess, I mean, I don't know. It just kind of seems like there's a lot of questions. Obviously, the folks presenting this will present this at that next meeting obviously have a lot of questions. So, I mean, I don't really know. There just seems like a lot of information they're probably going to want relative to cost, facilities, and you know, the season setup, how many teams, just kind of stuff like that. So, I mean, is there any other thing that we haven't really already discussed that you think is kind of important to what the public needs to know to make sure this is still going in the right direction?
Well, you know, again, the biggest thing is there'll be a proposal in late September, August, and November is the real one. That is the big presentation, and you know, they're not going to actually, if I remember right, they're actually not going to vote in November. That will happen in the spring, where they will actually yay or nay it. But November is the big one where all the people are going to be in one spot and say yes or no. But so if they say yes in the spring, you're still looking at probably 2 years, you know, in order to get that sport up and running, get the girls competing, get schedules going. Just because, let's say it's the spring, the likelihood of having enough numbers to do it won't be ready for next season. So the season after that is maybe when we could see women's wrestling, if everything goes accordingly. You know, some other things, I guess, they talked about is they weren't like they didn't come out. There is not concern, but there is concern of whether they even need more sports, because right now it's about a 60-40 split and 50-50 enrollment. So there's 60% of the sports are available for boys and 40% are for girls. In my mind, I mean, you want equality, right? So why not offer more opportunities for girls to wrestle or do other sports and get that to a 50-50 split? Everything's about equality in the world right now, right? So it just seems easy because you don't need to hire new coaches. Some schools will bring in their own girls coach. It's just not financially feasible for them to do that. So I think a high school coach can still handle a team. They'll just have to have some assistant coaches to maybe take the girls to specific events. I mean, there's just such a lot to digest, I guess, of with the one big thing too, Ross, is wrestling people are so stubborn. They think they know the right way, the right answers. I'm definitely probably one of those persons, multiple times. But sometimes our intensity, our passion can get in the way and ruin things, and we need to have it now. Right?
Right. I mean, that's just kind of one of the things where it's kind of hard. I mean, I'm just kind of speaking generally, not necessarily to anyone in particular here, but I mean, I think you can tell on social media that as far as wrestling fans go, we all have a similar thing where we like to control it. It's our guys. It's our sport. It's very personal to us. And that's probably just, there's a certain way I think a wrestling fan and athlete are wired. So it's very personal to us. So letting someone else make decisions, letting someone else be in control when we're used to controlling our own destiny, our own training, like it just kind of goes hand in hand. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's hard to give up control and let other people who might know better, might be better suited for this particular task in on it.
And the people on the board aren't wrestling people. They don't know what's going on right now in women's wrestling. In our mind, not a whole lot does change. There's just little bit more infrastructure that has to go into it. And I think the board has to look at it, non-subjectively. So they've got all these questions that would come up in another sport. And I think that's going to be really important for whoever makes this presentation to be very educated on the positives and negatives of women's wrestling getting added. I think the positives will way outweigh the negatives, which that was really the only thing that got brought up is the negatives of it. In our world, in our society, we want to know the blowbacks from our decisions, which instead of what are going to be the positive takeaways. I mean, this is going to Chloe Clemens, she just kept on saying, like, we don't have the equal opportunities as the boys to have a state tournament, to get that medal, to have our pictures in the hallway. We're just kind of participating with the boys, and they know that they can't compete with boys. Some of them can, some of them kick butt, but the majority of them are not going to be able to compete with the boys at this level. So they just want their, they want their tournament. I mean, if there's no, if the same amount of events that are happening right now around these JV tournaments, and then there's a state tournament at the end of the year that is sanctioned, that's all people are looking for. And that's going to create more opportunities, more tournaments at the high school level. So I think we have to be patient. We have to be respectful for the people that honestly are writing the checks and doing the books to make sure that we show the positives and how this can be, life-changing for some of these girls. It's already life-changing for some of these girls to be competing at the junior high level, at the high school level against the boys. Chloe said that she didn't want to be like every other girl and go out for dance or cheerleading or basketball. She wanted to be different. And that's what wrestling provides. It provides all walks of life. 2 legs, no legs, 1 arm, blind, deaf, girl, boy. It really invites anybody. And that's what I think administrators, the board needs to look at is there could be a girl out there that is just kind of lost right now, and wrestling could be her sport that cause it's an individual sport. And you don't have to rely on somebody else to write your faith. So if you're out there, you're motivated, this would be that opportunity.
Agreed. Yeah.
So we'll keep on following this story as well. Jason Lloyd has been doing a great job of kind of keeping me up on it. Clemens, Chloe's dad, was actually the guy that let me know that the meeting was happening. So shout out to him for hooking me up with that, getting to sit in that meeting and just kind of see the process of how that looks. I think it was good to know, and the realistic idea that we could add women's wrestling. I'll leave women fans with this: is there is legitimate interest here from the board. They know what it can do, but is a political type deal right now, to where they can't come out and, they can't say their stance, yay or nay, because they don't know all the facts and how it all gets implemented. So I think if we stay positive and, write letters to the Iowa Girls Union saying, please add women's wrestling, or if you're a girl out there and you've competed and it's changed you in one way or not, send an email just saying, this is why I went out for wrestling, this is what it's doing for me. I want girls to have the same opportunities 5-10 years from now because I stood up and said something. So that's what I would say. Don't email them saying, this is BS that you're not getting women's wrestling in, equal rights, fighting, like we're not boycotting anything. Like, don't do that. Like, send positive information, get your ADs involved, get the people that make decisions, and who those people are, get them to send emails to them, and they're reading them. Trust me, they are reading them, and that's what got this meeting to, this discussion actually to the table. Because this has been going on for 2-3 years now, and we're to this point now where this actually was an agenda item. So that's a positive news. So on that note, what's next? We got anything else?
Open practices are still going on, but obviously high school season still ways off. Guys are just getting in the room. I posted all those headshots on Twitter of all the Iowa guys. A lot of cleaned up looks. Jason Renteria and DeSanto got their headshots, so they're finally in the room and confirmed, they got their pictures, so nobody can ask, is DeSanto actually coming anymore? They have a picture of him. He's in Iowa. So, I don't know anything else. I think we did good.
Yep. Well, if you got any more questions in regards to the meeting, happy to answer them. A lot of people have reached out, and I wanted just to kind of have one little platform here just to kind of give you everything that I remember, the important parts, and I'm sure I left something out. But if there's a specific question you have, shoot me a tweet at Hager Tony, or find me on Facebook, or shoot me an email. All my information is on the website. Happy to answer them. And if you got anything that you would like the Iowa Girls Association to have, and you don't feel comfortable emailing them personally, I'd be happy to do it on your behalf as an anonymous. Let's just keep the positive, as Kyle Snyder would say, positive infinity going. So for Ross Bartachek, everybody at IA Wrestle, I'm Tony Hager. Thanks for listening.
Get low when the whistle goes.